Does
turn
it?
or not. I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't matter.
Oh, it does.
Just a couple of real quick little announcements. First of all, your audiogram interpretation assignments are all graded, and the grades are uploaded to Gradebook on UK. You should be able to access them. And I have them here, so before you leave, please be sure to take it with you. I've got them kind of split up alphabetically, beginning of the alphabet, end of the alphabet. For those of you who are undergraduates, so they can come back or whatever you want to do. You may or may not know, I think it's pretty common knowledge, but Dr. Marin is going to be stepping down as chair of the department in preparation for her retirement in 2015. And so as part of that, we are interviewing candidates for new chair. And as most programs, we hope to find internal candidates for that process because it makes life a heck of a lot easier than to do an external search. And Dr. Graham, many of you have had, has actually applied for that position. And there are going to be a series of chats, informationals, with different parts of the student body to ask questions and to have some input into that process. So I've sent out emails to as many of you as I can because I guess there's a glitch in the listserv. It's not going to everyone. So you should have gotten an email from me, if not from the listserv, about that. There is an undergrad forum tomorrow at 11 o'clock downstairs in room 45. So if you have questions about that process, if you have input that you would like to give, certainly you can make it 11 o'clock tomorrow downstairs in room 45. You will also be getting a survey that you can actually participate in. My assumption and understanding is that it is anonymous. It's a survey not unless you opt in to provide your information and it's anonymous. That's my understanding. So if you can't make it but would like to have some input, certainly feel free. I would encourage you to fill out that survey. It's a really important decision, and we really do want and appreciate your feedback in that process. So in any case, I just wanted to make sure to throw that out there. So, tomorrow at 11, downstairs in 45. Questions about that? But anyway, so moving to our topic at hand, we talked on Tuesday about the different types of hearing aids that we have. We talked about amplification in general is hearing aids, assistive devices, and then there are other types of sensory devices like cochlear implants, implantables, things of that nature. We're going to talk about the non-hearing aids options that are available for our patients with hearing loss today. And what's really cool is that we know and understand that despite the improvements in hearing aid technology today compared to even 3 to 5 years ago, hearing aids are not necessarily the solution or the only solution for a lot of our folks who have hearing impairment. And so there are a wide variety of other assistive devices available. We're going to talk about some of those today. I've listed just an overview of some of the different types that are available. There's amplified telephones, so the telephones that have a volume. That's pretty commonplace. I mean, I think, obviously our cell phones have that option, but there are landline phones that are actually specifically designed for people with hearing impairment so that they can actually get a mega boost of volume if they need it. Probably, I think one of the coolest things is now the availability of caption phones. You guys probably all seen some of the cheesy, hokey commercials about the grandma that gets the phone call from the grandchild who's announcing the birth of a new sibling, or the one about the kid who got some award or did something really cool in his soccer game. And what happens is with this new technology, there's voice recognition software involved or installed on the phone, and so whatever the person says actually appears in the form of captions on screen on the hearing impaired listener's phone, so that they have a much better idea of what's being said. So that's really kind of a cool thing. There are neck loop systems or streamer systems that if the person has hearing aids that have a telecoil or a magnetic coil in their hearing aids, they will interface with a telephone if the phone is placed to the ear. They can also wear a neck loop so that there's a little cord that then has some sort of a streaming device on it. If you have been down to the clinic, we use similar devices for programming hearing aids. Some of the hearing aids you may have seen we actually have to connect cords and plug in, but others it's completely wireless. It uses Bluetooth. So that a person could have, I could have my cell phone over there, hearing aids on, my phone rings, and I've got my streamer. And what's really cool is they're really small. You could wear one under your shirt, and no one would even know that it's there. Press the button, and now the phone goes directly, whatever has been said goes directly to the hearing aids. So the hearing aids work almost like a headset. And most of the manufacturers are now making it an option where it's stereo sound, so that it's not just going in one ear. Like when we pick up the phone and talk on the phone, we're only hearing it in one ear. And there are times when that's fine, because you really want to be able to monitor and tell what's going on. But there are other times when you may really want to just be listening, and these newer technology allows us to give the person stereo sound. Those streaming devices also will then work with things like MP3 players, computers. There's a little plug-in that can be plugged into a television, that then the television sound goes directly into the hearing aids, so that the hearing aids act not only as amplification devices, but also act almost like a headset or earbuds for connectivity to other devices. Believe me, a lot of patients really like that, or their significant others really like that, because one of the biggest complaints is, the TV is too loud. Well, now the family member's significant other can adjust the volume on the TV to the level that they want. The person can then stream it, and they can adjust their volume through their hearing aids so that the sound's going directly in. And they get much better sound quality, because a lot of folks will complain, well, even when I turn it up, I still can't understand what they're saying. Well, that's because you're turning everything up, whereas the hearing aids are going to selectively amplify, so chances are it's going to be clear. There's captioning systems for TV. I love captioning. I think it's one of the greatest inventions ever, because a lot of times I'm the night owl in my family. My wife, if she's awake past 9 o'clock, it's not going to be a pretty morning, because she needs her 8 to 9 hours of sleep, and so so it's nice if I want to, have the TV on. If I'm working on something, I can turn on the TV, turn down the volume, and turn on the captions. You learn over time. There are certain programs or certain stations that you don't want to bother, because the captions are so out of sync with what's happening on the television that you're playing catch up. But for the most part, it works out really well. It's designed for people with hearing impairment, but it works for other things as well. It makes it kind of nice. There are TV listening systems, just like I mentioned, that people with a streamer can use their hearing aids. Well, there are devices like this one. They're called TV ears, where you have a piece of apparatus that plugs into the TV. Then the person wears this headset. It has an infrared receiver on it, and there's an infrared signal that's being transmitted from the television to there, puts the sound in their ears. And so again, the volume can be turned down on the TV so that it's comfortable for everyone else, but they can adjust the volume then on this headset. An option. There's other devices. People, for instance, most of you are probably not parents, but if you have an infant child, most people have a baby monitor. Well, if you're significantly hearing impaired, baby monitor is not going to do you a whole lot of good if you can't hear it. Well, they make baby monitors that flash or vibrate whenever there's sound coming through so that it alerts you that, oh my gosh, there's something going on. There's doorbell alerts that flash. You can have an alert put on your phone where it'll actually make the lights dim and brighten, or you can have an alarm clock that has a little pad that either goes in your pillow or under the mattress, and it will vibrate and shake when your alarm clock goes off. So there's lots of these different types of alerting systems that are available. There's FM systems, so that just like I talked about the streamer that uses Bluetooth, there are streamers that use FM radio waves. Those are really commonly used in the school setting, where if you have, the teacher may have a microphone and a transmitter, and the child then has a receiver that picks up, and the teacher's voice is sent by FM to the receiver that the child or adults use them too, so that the sound goes again directly into the hearing aid. So it overcomes distance, background noise in particular. It's great. One of the benefits of any kind of an FM or Bluetooth or infrared-based system is that it improves the signal-to-noise ratio, so that background noise is bypassed, and it allows for more direct communication, so that a person listening through one of these devices, it's like whatever the sound source is, whether it's the person talking or television or whatever, it's like they're right there next to your ears, which has some definite advantages. Loop systems, again, person has to have a telecoil option on their hearing aid, but it's an induction loop, it's a magnetic field. Those are really common and becoming very widely used in large spaces, churches, theaters, auditoriums, places like that. Michigan actually is leading the way, and just about any significant public space in Michigan, they've appropriated funding and gotten grants where they are now the most looped state in the country. And so, my wife and I, we always, our family vacations in Southwest Michigan every year, and my wife was noticing last summer, they actually have like a little sticker on the entrance to different places if they're looped. And after about the 8th one that we had seen in a single day, she's like, what does that mean? What's that for? And I said, well, it's to let people that wear hearing aids know that they have a loop system here so that you can tap into it if you need it. For example, we had a Panera that we went to, and their PA system where they like announce order number whatever is ready is looped, so that if you wear hearing aids, you're going to be able to hear when they announce that order number whatever or so-and-so's order is ready. The movie theater had. Why they necessarily need it in movie theaters, I don't know, because normally I feel like I need hearing protection when I'm in the movie theaters. But it is available, and so I guess if you are profoundly hearing impaired, you might appreciate that. But know that there's lots of availability for assistive devices.
So does that pick it up like wirelessly?
Mm-hmm. Okay. It's a magnetic field. Yeah, it's really kind of cool. My point in telling you this is that there are some people that maybe their hearing loss isn't significant enough to warrant hearing aids, but maybe they have some specialty listening needs where some sort of an assistive device might be helpful. Conversely, there may be people that need and use hearing aids, but it's not alone meeting all of their communication needs, and so there are devices that can supplement as well. And that's why we have them. There's a great website that I'm going to turn you on to called BeyondHearingAids.com. Beyond Hearing Aids is a local business. It's actually located in Erlanger in northern Kentucky. And they are a national clearinghouse for all things assistive technology. They actually have a showroom where you can schedule an appointment and go in, and they have consultants available who will, let's say, Elizabeth, let's say your grandma wears hearing aids, and she's really struggling with her phone. And her contract's up, and you guys want to make sure she really gets a good fit for her cell phone. When you can schedule an appointment, you can take her in there. They will take a look at her hearing aids. They've got specs. They can then find, what phone might really be best for her. And for some items, they actually have demos available right there where you can try and see how it works. But they have compatibility. But they have absolutely everything and anything that you could imagine. And I will click on this just to take you there for a moment, because it is absolutely amazing, the stuff that they have. Let's find their store. So you go to their hearing aid store, and it tells you, these are all the different types of categories of things that you can look at. They have stuff for low vision. They have TV systems. Okay, so we go to the TV systems, and they're going to give you a listing of all these different devices and accessories that a person might want or need for TV. Cell phones and accessories, that's a big one. There are all kinds of nifty gadgets and phones that are available. If you want personal amplifier of some sort, maybe not hearing aids. So there's all these different types of personal amplifiers that are available. And you name it, it's there. So I would just encourage you, if you're not familiar with assistive technology, that you might want to go to that website and just kind of peek around and look at some of the different things. It's mind-boggling. And pretty much, if there's a specific hearing need that the person has, there's probably an assistive device that can help them. And if you're not finding it, this is the place to go. You can call them, you can send them an email, and if they can't find it and help you, then probably give up. Wave the white flag, because it's probably not available. They do an awesome job. I have worked with them with a number of clients. What's really cool is you, as professionals or student professionals, they don't charge you for that consultative service. You can, so you can refer your clients there, or you can call them with questions, and they'll answer anything. Fantastic. And the nice thing is it's local, so that if you need it really fast, worst case scenario is you're going to drive over by the airport and go pick it up. And if it's something that can be shipped, it's usually next day. Okay? So, assistive devices are designed to either supplement or to replace other types of amplification systems. But there are some people that we're going to work with, or that we're going to encounter, that hearing aids are just not going to help them. Their hearing is so severely impaired, or their ability to understand is so severely impaired that hearing aids are just not a viable option. And for many of those individuals, a cochlear implant may be a viable option. So, who here has ever seen or worked with a patient that has a cochlear implant? Cochlear implants have been around for a long time, but they have come a long way. I can remember when I was in graduate school, and the year was 1987, and the House Ear Institute had come out, and they were starting to in several centers, including the University of Louisville, where I was, we were one of only about 5 places in the entire country that were doing cochlear implants. And it was a single channel implant. So it was an electrode that just delivered basically for like a buzzing sound that was in time. So you got like inflectional information, things like that. But that was it. Well, now most of the implants have 22 channels or more, so that, you know, rather than one tone, one frequency band, imagine the audiogram, it now divides the audiogram into 22 different bands. And for any of you who've actually seen a hearing aid fitting, a lot of the hearing aids only have 6, 12, 10. You know, most of the hearing aids don't have upwards of 22 channels to allow us to really fine-tune the sound. So cochlear implants have come a very, very long way just in my career from the time I was sitting where you guys are until now. But basically, what it does is it restores that access to sound. It does not cure hearing loss. I'll repeat that. It does not cure hearing loss. Because if the implant's turned off, if it's broken, the person is still deaf. And they are truly deaf at this point because in implanting the device, they actually insert the electrode array through the cochlea so that it basically destroys the internal structures of the cochlea, and this electrode array then lies directly on the surface of the auditory nerve as it's embedded through the cochlea. So whereas in a normally functioning ear, the hair cells pick up the sound waves and they, an electrochemical reaction happens and that stimulates the hearing nerve, and then the sound is sent to the brain and you understand. Well, with a cochlear implant, what happens is that electrode array lays right on top of it and directly sends those electrical impulses to the hearing nerve. So it bypasses and or replaces the structures of the cochlea to directly stimulate that 8th cranial nerve. Okay? So it works very differently than a hearing aid. It is a medical device, so it is something that had to get FDA approval. There are strict protocols that have to be followed in terms of determining who's a candidate for the surgical process, for the rehabilitation process. So it's not something that just because a person has significant hearing loss, they're automatically able to get a cochlear implant. For older children and adults, there's obviously the hearing test batteries. There's a psychological battery that they have to be subjected to. It's more than just the audiogram.
Is it painful to get that put in?
I'm sure that there's a little bit of discomfort. Like it's a surgical procedure, so I'm sure that there's probably some initial discomfort, but I've never had anyone, complain. I have had them, like they call it mapping, when they actually turn on the device, because they implant it first and then it's just in there and things are healing for a while, and then they actually turn it on, and then the audiologist will start programming it, much like we do hearing aids, but they call that process mapping. And you basically then can administer a hearing test through the implant so that you establish their thresholds, where how much of a jolt can you give them at a particular frequency, so through a particular electrode where they then report that they're hearing sound. And then you can also establish a comfort level. How much can you give them before they're like, oh? So you get this range of useful hearing. And I've had patients who, that needed to come in and have their map adjusted because certain sounds were really painful. I had a patient who, I don't do mapping myself. I haven't in years, but there was a patient in the clinic where I worked who was complaining every time that the dog would bark was painful, and the dinging sound that you sometimes get when you get in the car and the door is open, that dinging sound was really painful, and so we had to figure out which electrode or electrodes were causing that, and we had to. So that part can be painful. But yeah, there's going to be a little bit of probably headachy type of pain initially, but it's usually not something long-standing.
Do most people who decide to get cochlear implants, are they actually deaf like from birth, or do you see people who became profoundly deaf, or is it just a mix?
It's all of the above.
Okay.
All of the above. Someone else? Yeah.
How does that work with the brain though? Because wouldn't some people the auditory part of their brain wouldn't have ever been used, so it would be more difficult for them to.
Yes. And that's why they have to have rehabilitation. They have to learn. And it's interesting because kids who are congenitally deaf or who are prelingually deafened and get them, they learn, that's the only sound they've ever heard. So for them, that's normal. But for adults who have had normal hearing, what they report is that initially it's like learning to listen to and understand a dialect or a foreign language, that they have to learn to reassociate how certain things sound, so that my voice, your voice, television, whatever, isn't going to sound exactly the same as it did before, but they're very quickly able to reattach themselves. Our brain is very plastic, but that is definitely a process of adjustment. I'm not advocating him at all. Please do not interpret it. But you may be familiar with Rush Limbaugh. He's a very right-wing conservative talk show host. Tends to be very controversial. He often, in my humble opinion, I don't mean to offend anyone on either side, I think he often says things without thinking. And just witness him. Well, Rush had gotten an infection and had an autoimmune response where his own body, in response to this infection, attacked his ears and he became deaf. This is a guy who's a radio talk show host. His ability to hear is his bread and butter. He was implanted and he's back on the radio and he can hear and understand and carry on a conversation just like before. His voice sounds exactly the same as it did before. I think if you listened to recordings of him before and listen to him now, he sounds exactly the same. So, yes, there's definitely a learning curve involved. There's a process. And for different people, they're going to have different levels of success with it. But particularly with kids, because this is the only way they've ever heard, they tend to adapt very quickly.
Like you said, the first one in 1987, if someone had that one and then later on,
Most everyone who had the early rudimentary ones have been reimplanted.
Oh, so is it hard to do that, or?
There's always a risk involved, but as in terms of surgical procedures, it's not like having open heart surgery. It's not that complicated. There's certainly a very different skill set involved. You don't want just anyone in there drilling in your cochlea and it right there next to your brain, but they're certainly able. My son's teacher, her son was deafened right before the age of 2 with meningitis, and he got implanted in both ears and was doing quite well, and then one of the implants failed. It just went dead, and so they had to go in and reimplant that. He lost about 3 months of buying it. Because now, and see, back in the day when I was first starting out, they only implanted one ear. And now the custom is that that they typically will do both. And so Adrian has implants in each ear, and he had actually the other one subsequently failed as well, and they had to replace it. And that particular unit that they had used with him has subsequently been recalled and taken off the market, and they've replaced it with different ones. That was a touchy situation too, because initially the manufacturer didn't. The insurance said they're not going to pay for a second surgery for it because it failed, and the manufacturer did not want to. But then they started having more and more cases, and they realized there was a problem, so they recalled it, and they actually did pay for the reimplantation of dozens of patients.
Since there is such a high cost that's associated with this, if someone can't afford to do both at one time, would they wait until they can't afford it, or would they go ahead and do something?
I've seen every combination. The good news is that cochlear implant surgery is typically covered by all insurances, including Medicare and Medicaid. At the University of Florida, the youngest patients that were implanted were still infants, and the oldest patient that was implanted while I was doing my doctoral program was 95. So, it's usually one of those where if they have insurance of some sort, whether it's any of the public governmental supported programs or private insurance, the people that are really screwed are the ones that are just completely uninsured, because then I would say the cost for the surgery and the follow-up care is we're talking into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It ain't cheap. Yes.
Maybe I'm making this up, but did I hear somewhere that they don't last like the whole lifetime?
Oh no, it will not. I mean, well, if you're 95 years old, chances are your implant's going to outlive you. But if you're an infant, then chances are pretty good that over your lifetime you're going to need to be reimplanted. Absolutely. So no, you didn't make that up.
About how long after?
I've not read the most recent. I'm sure that they've come up with new, but I've worked with patients that are in 10 and 12-year-old implants, and they're working fine. My guess is probably a 10 to 15-year lifespan is probably pretty typical, but don't quote me on that because I haven't actually looked to see if we have new data, but that was the average before. I'll check on that.
Do audiologists do the procedure, or is it like a certain type of surgery?
An ENT actually does the surgical aspect, and then the audiologist does the mapping and the management of the device itself, and then typically speech pathologists, although sometimes audiologists, will actually do the follow-up communication training. Someone else had a hand up. Yes?
I was wondering about quality of life for kids with cochlear implants, and anything like with if they can't play sports or if they can't, do certain things in school. If you know anything about that.
I know kids who are implanting. There are certain things that they want you to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
They probably should not be playing football. Soccer's iffy because you could and frequently do use your head. I know if my son were deaf and used an implant, he would not be playing soccer. You can't go swimming with it. I mean, so it's not that you can't do those activities, but you're going to have to take the device off, and so you're going to be deaf during some of those activities. But things where there's likely to be a blow to the head, I typically are contraindicated. Whether they're wearing the device or not, because they're still part of it, it's in me. So yeah, there are going to be some restrictions, but you try telling those kids, especially a kid with special needs, that there's something they can't do, they're going to figure out. It's been my experience. But one of the coolest things that I ever encountered, I was at a conference, and it was on oral rehab, and they were doing a seminar on the impact of cochlear implantation on language acquisition in children who were prelingually deafened. And there was a family who had two daughters, and they had the Connexin syndrome, which is hearing loss is one of the main problems. Everything else, it's not. There's no cognitive deficits associated with it or anything. And they had these two beautiful daughters. One was 6, and one was about 3.5 or 4. And both of them were congenitally deafened and were implanted as infants. And it was really interesting because they had videos and stuff. The family actually showed up in the room. And the older daughter, who was, for her age, extremely sophisticated and mature, she actually agreed to come up on stage, sat at the table with the panelists, and was fielding questions from people in the back of the room. And when you listen to her talk, she didn't have a deaf-sounding speech. She sounded, completely normal. She had perfectly, articulated speech. She didn't even have like some of the age-expected sound errors. I mean, she truly sounded like a little adult. And so it was really kind of cool because that was basically what they were showing, is that with early implantation, typically by school age, usually no later than 4th grade, but often even earlier than that, the language gap has closed and the education gap has closed with kids that are implanted versus kids who are deaf and aren't implanted. And so it was really kind of cool to see that. And her little sister was equally precocious for her, for her age. But it was one of the neatest things. And like, there were people, sitting in the, in the front of the room that couldn't hear and understand what was being said by people in the back. And this little girl's up on the stage, and she was able to hear and understand everything. So anyway, other questions before we move on? I want to go through the components and show you some of the different parts.
So if like a teenager who was congenitally deaf was, I saw like a TV episode about this once. I didn't get to see the end of it, but got like implanted. Would they have to do basically? Because they know how to read. Like, would they go to speech therapy and then just learn how to break down the phonemes of each word, and they would have to?
Well, there are kids that are deaf that know how to read. I mean,
he wouldn't know how to read, but then how to speak, because he's not.
Yeah, they may, if they weren't verbal before, there's a chance that they may become verbal. But if they were congenitally deafened and now they're probably never going to have the same quality of speech that a kid who got implanted earlier had, or an adult who had normal hearing and becomes deaf. They're the ones that are going to be somewhere in the middle. They're certainly going to be able to hear when the implant is on. They're probably going to eventually get to pretty good understanding, comprehension, but they may not get very functional verbal communication. They don't have the same frame of reference. Little kids who have known nothing else, that's how they learn. So their brain acts. Whereas in the adults, they learn to assimilate. It's those ones that basically they have auditory deprivation and communication deprivation for a long time. Outcomes are not quite as great. I have a patient who, she was severely hearing impaired since birth. But used hearing aids, and she had developed speech, and she sounded somewhat stereotypically deaf speech, but you could certainly understand her. She was fully intelligible. But her hearing started to get worse, and she got implanted at the age of 24. And it was amazing. Her speech got so much better. It was, she kept a hearing aid for 1 year. She only got implanted in 1 year, but she was afraid of the whole process. So she has an implant on the right, she wears a hearing aid on the left, and so her brain's actually getting competing different signals, and yet she functions beautifully, and her speech outcome was amazing. I mean, she would blow me away. How, I was just like, when we talk about a cochlear implant, we talk about the external and the internal components. So there are some things that are on the outside, and then there's things that are on the inside. So on the outside, we have one or more microphones. Most of them now have directional microphones, like I talked about with the hearing aids, where they have the two microphones that help them be able to hear and localize sound and noise. It has a speech processor, which is basically where the sound comes in and is manipulated and interpreted. And then it has a transmitter that sends that digitally manipulated or processed sound internally to the internal components, where it has a receiver. So we're hearing a lot of the same terminology that we hear in hearing aids. It has the stimulator, which actually then takes that speech information and converts it into electrical impulses, which are then delivered using that electrode array. This is what it looks like. So this is the external components. This is our speech processor. Okay, right here. And the microphones pick up the sound, and it then delivers that sound through this transmitter, right there. And then it's magnetic. It's held on by a magnet, and then that information is picked up by the receiver and converted into electrical energy in that stimulator, and then that electric array goes through the bone and into the cochlea. Okay. This one's rather large. They are getting smaller, as are hearing aids. But you get the point, and I like this one just because it's big enough that you can actually see the different parts. But what's really cool is these cords, just like we showed the speech processors are available in different colors now. The cords are available in different colors. The transmitter is available in different colors, so people can actually match it to their hair, and their hair can cover this up. I mean, this one, we purposely want you to see it, but it's not like people are necessarily going to see this big honking thing with someone who routinely wears it. Okay? So their hair can cover that up, and it's fine. You're going to ask something? Or you just...
I was just going to say that when I worked with the deaf kids over the summer, and a lot of them had, like, the attachment was like their hair color, and the cord was, but then the earpiece was some kind of, like,
funky color,
pattern.
Yeah. Neon, yeah. I don't know if it's Cochlear. There's three main companies. Cochlear Americas, which, well, it's Cochlear, and then there's Cochlear and Cochlear Americas. Cochlear's out of Australia. But then their American version. I don't know if it's Cochlear or if it's Nedell. I don't think it's a Nucleus. Nucleus is the other one. There's Cochlear, Nedell, and Nucleus. Cochlear and Nedell. We actually have a SpongeBob one. Anyway. if the kid wants it, they have people that they can get on it and probably
Like girls especially, does hair affect the pickup, like how much the microphone picks up at all, or just because it's
no
bright?
more so than like with hearing aids. It shouldn't be a problem. Do you notice a huge difference in your hearing if you pull your hair back versus wear it down? Yes, there's going to be some difference, but it's sound waves. They can still penetrate. Yes.
This is probably a dumb question.
No, it's not. The only dumb question is the one that you don't ask.
Would, if like you didn't have a transmitter on and like some other magnet was up to it, would it like?
Yeah.
I know
It's
it would stick to it,
magnetic.
but would it like mess it up somehow?
Not necessarily mess it up, but it could interfere with the signal getting through, because then you've got competing regular magnet that's got no speech signal coming in, and when it does, so.
Would any kind of electronic thing or anything
Yeah,
like
like
that
they can't
mess it
have
up?
an MRI. They can't have an MRI. So yeah, you want to avoid.
X-rays? Would you probably
The X-rays are okay. They can have X-rays, but anything with significant magnetic field, you really do want to avoid. Especially like an MRI, because it'll just actually the magnet is so it'll rip it right out of their skull. So. Okay, so do you feel like you have an idea of what it looks like? Yeah, so they just cut around the ear. And the good forward, so then they have direct access. They do the same thing. If you have big ears like this, you want to have ears like rather than a tiny tap and big tap. They do the same thing. They just go in. They basically make an incision. They snip off some of the skin, stitch it back together. Now your ears are free. So. That was one of the things that was really Dr. Scarborough and I went to the University of Quebec for residency programs, and because we were part of the surgery, and in particular we were in the same offices with the ENTs, we got to see, implant surgeries. I got to see tongue clippings for kids that were tongue-tied. We got to see PE tubes put in. I got to see ear tucks. Got to see tonsillectomies. We got to see a lot of these, surgeries. It was no big deal. You just signed up, you went, you observed. Yeah. So. Really kind of neat. And when you see the procedure done, it really, I think, really does help aid your understanding. So, but does it make sense how it's got some of the same components of a hearing aid, but it works very, very differently? Okay? So, how it works is that microphone picks up the sound just like you would with a hearing aid, and the speech processor then kind of is tuned to the speech signals, just like hearing aids are now, or good hearing aids are. And it transmits, processes that sound, it can digitally manipulate it, transmits that sound to the receiver. So across that magnet, so again, we talked about loop system, induction loop systems, and how we can actually, the hearing aids can serve as sort of an earpiece, same process, that magnetic. Telephones all have magnets in them, that's how they work. That sound is then sent through the transmitter to the receiver, into the stimulator, and that stimulator converts those sound that sound information that's digital into an electrical impulse. And then those impulses are sent along the electrode array, and depending on the frequency, they're going to stimulate different parts of the auditory nerve. So, thinking back to your anatomy, if this is our cochlea, here, high frequencies, mid frequencies, low frequencies. Okay. So they're selectively tuned, and so basically, rather than sound waves triggering hair cells, that then stimulate the hearing nerve, we just directly put the impulses in. Pretty cool. Amazing stuff. Okay. So this is something that you probably should understand, and that is that hearing aids do work differently than cochlear implants. In both cases, a person's hearing loss is not cured. It doesn't cure hearing loss. But whereas with hearing aid users, they can have useful hearing. You want them to have useful hearing. With cochlear implant user, you don't want useful hearing, because why would you destroy functional hearing? So they don't have useful hearing. They cannot benefit from hearing aid technology, and it replaces those damaged structures of the inner ear. Whereas for a hearing aid candidate, you want them to have useful hearing. You want them to have access and the ability to obtain useful information. The sound is just modified and manipulated. It's not converted. But again, neither of them restore normal hearing. So like if you wear contacts or glasses, with my contacts out, I cannot see well. Wear them. Okay. 1972 is when experimentation with a single channel unit started, and by 1984 they were doing human implants. It was no longer considered an experimental procedure, and so by 1987, when I was in grad school, we were doing them routinely at the University of Louisville. In the 1990s is when they started developing and using multi-channel devices, and now bilateral implantation is the norm. Worldwide, there are over 250,000 people who use cochlear implants, and over 75,000 of those people are in the U.S. alone. As of 2010, about 40,000 people using cochlear implants in the U.S. were adults, and 35,000 were kids. But those numbers are getting closer and are expected to reverse, so that the majority over time, as we have more and more cochlear implant users, it's expected that over time it's going to be many more pediatric patients than adults that will be using it, which kind of makes sense. Okay? There is a controversy surrounding the use of cochlear implants in the deaf community. And there are some very strong feelings about cochlear implants, particularly implanting children. There are some lovely quotes from folks in the deaf community about cochlear implants. Cochlear implants are an affront to the deaf community. They're a threat to our way of life from the hearing community. Deafness is not something that needs to be fixed. And the decision whether or not to get a cochlear implant should be left to adults who can make an informed choice. It's not something that should be imposed on children. Okay? That's that's the prevailing attitude, just so that you know, within the deaf community.
If you were implanted as a child by your parents and then you later grew up and decided you wanted to be part of the deaf community, just would you take it off and then just leave it in, or could you?
That would be your choice.
I didn't know if it would be.
They can undo it. You're still going to have a little bit of a hole, a little bit of a divot there where they drilled out part of your mastoid bone, but. There is a really good series called Sound and Fury, and there's been a sequel to it, and it is about a family who have both deaf and hearing members in their family, and the controversy that starts when decision is made to implant one of the grandchildren. So we have the parents who are hearing. They have several sons and daughters. Some of their kids are deaf and some are normal hearing. But there's a congenital hereditary condition going on. And their kids that are deaf all married deaf people and basically are very active in the deaf community. Their kids that are in the hearing world, that are normally hearing, live in the hearing world and have all married hearing spouses. One of the hearing sons married a hearing woman whose parents are deaf. So now we've got a gene pool on two sides with deafness. They have a child who's born deaf. And they decide they're going to get this child implanted. And all hell breaks loose. Because the feeling is, why are we doing this? It's a threat. Long story short, it's a very interesting, and you can Google it and watch it on the internet from PBS, called Sound and Fury. And then there's a follow-up several years later, because what happened is some of the adults decided to get implanted, and some of them had success and some of them didn't. But the bottom line is there's definitely strong feelings. Most folks in the deaf community are not real fond of speech pathologists and audiologists because they have the prevailing attitude that most of us want to fix them. And most of them have the attitude that they need to be fixed. They view their deafness as just a trait, having green eyes or curly hair or whatever the case may be. And so I can understand why they might have some. I've always been saying it's personal choice. You give the people the information, you allow them to make an influence. And I think most speech pathologists and audiologists are that way. But there are some that are not, and just like with most things, a few bad apples can spoil it for everyone. But I want you to think about this, and maybe talk amongst yourselves for a minute. If you were asked, would you define deafness as a medical condition, is it a diagnosis, or is it simply a cultural difference, character trait? Who should be the one making a decision about implantation of children? Should the parents make that decision, or should they wait and leave it up to the child, knowing that all the research shows that outcomes are poorer in prelingually deafened individuals who are not implanted until later? Okay? And what would your attitude be if you're deaf parents and you have a deaf child? Would it be any different than if you're experienced parents and you have a deaf child? So just kind of discuss those amongst yourself for a minute, and we'll take a little consensus poll here in a couple minutes. So take 3 to 5 minutes. Okay, let's kind of see if we have any kind of a consensus. And I just, this is your opinion, there's no right answer or wrong answer. Who feels that they view deafness more as a medical condition, as a diagnosis, something that we can treat? Okay. Who sees it as simply a cultural trait or characteristic? Anyone kind of straddle the fence and see what? I agree that there are cultural traits to it, but to me it is a medical condition. That doesn't mean that I advocate that we have to do something about it. There are a lot of medical conditions that we don't necessarily do something about. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't change that it's not a true medical condition, but culturally, socially, economically, whatever reason, we may choose to not intervene. There's no right answer. I would be amazed if we didn't have the variety of opinions that we have, and that's okay. That's healthy. That's good. And I certainly, even though I do view it as a medical condition that we can intervene, I don't advocate that we must. I think that we give people information and we allow them to make an informed choice. I do respect that there is a community of people, a culture that views their deafness differently than I do, and that's perfectly okay. I wish that more of them respected my opinion as much as I do theirs, but it's the way of the world. What about the whole issue of implanting children? Who do you think should be making that decision? Should it be the parents of the children, or is it something that you think is best left for that individual when they're old enough to make an informed choice of their own?
What is old enough?
That's the problem. It's arbitrary. Technically, the age of reason is considered 7 years of age. The age of consent can be anywhere between 16 and 18, depending on where you are and what you're talking about legally. So, I guess basically we're looking at somewhere between 7 and 18 years of age, arbitrarily. And again, there's no right or wrong answer to this. I'm just wondering what you guys think. Who thinks it should be a decision left to the parents? Who thinks it's a decision that should be left to the individual when they can make an informed choice? Okay, interesting. Why? Why do we feel overwhelmingly that it's a parental choice?
Parents make all other choices for their young children. What makes this different?
That's my thinking. Okay. I'm the dad. Why? Because I'm the dad. What? Because I'm the dad. Someone else? Anyone else? Yes, great.
I feel that since cochlear implants can't be taken out, you're still going to have hearing loss if you take it out and don't use it. If the child finds a strong connection in the deaf community and that's where they want
Right.
to be.
And it's a procedure with a very, overall, a very low risk. They're already deaf. You can't make them more deaf. The risk of infection and other complications is there, like there are with any number of things, but it's very, very low. And like you said, it's not something that can't be undone. Yes?
Well, also it's time sensitive, so if they don't get it as young children, it won't be as
That's my thinking. Why not? And again, it's very hard for me to think about this as anything other than a parent. I should say. I know enough from the medical technical standpoint that as a parent, I can't fathom not making that choice, because if my child decides later on, you know what, I'm much more comfortable in the deaf community, then he doesn't turn the freaking thing on or he doesn't use it. But at least he's got the benefit of potentially being able to navigate two worlds. Don't we encourage bilingual lifestyles? Don't we encourage diversity? I think it's great. I think that particularly kids who have cochlear implants can be ambassadors for both the hearing and the deaf communities and can kind of bridge that gap. At least but again, that's my opinion. My grandpa used to say about opinions, they're like asses, we all got them, but you don't need to share it with everybody. I do. But anyway, so the consensus is that the parents should be making the decision. But can you appreciate and understand how a set of parents who are deaf and have a deaf child, how their thinking process may be very different than hearing parents who have a deaf child? Absolutely. And for me, if my wife and I had a child who was deaf, I would want them implanted for lots of reasons, not the least of which is their access to education, communication, blah, blah, blah. But also, you want them to, as much as possible, experience life the way that you do. And so I can also understand why deaf parents might say, well, why would I want to do that? My child's going to be then experiencing things that I can't relate to, that I can't understand, that I can't appreciate. I think there's there's valid arguments on both sides, but I think that we need to understand as professionals that there are differing opinions, and that depending on the specific circumstances within the family, we may arrive at very different recommendations or very different decisions, and that's okay. Right? One last thing that I want to cover before I let you go today. There are two other types of hearing devices that are now available. One, Lyric is a name brand, and it's the one that's been around the longest, but there are now several others that are coming on the market. Basically, it is like a miniature, completely in the canal hearing aid, the ones that I said I can't stand, where it is even tinier, and it is, you have to have a surgical lamp, surgical microscope in your office, and you actually insert it down into the ear canal so deeply that it's pretty much almost right against the eardrum. The advantage to it is obviously cosmetic. They're used with a long life battery that lasts about 4 months. So it has to be taken out and replaced about every 4 months. So people buy subscriptions, and it can be worn 24/7. They're water resistant. You can wear it in the shower, things like that. You should not go swimming with it, but water sports and other activities are fine. It is analog. It is not digital. So everything that comes in is loud or louder. It doesn't allow us to selectively manipulate the sound signal like we can with digital hearing aids. It's basically, we can emphasize high, low, and tone control, but it's not nearly as fine-tuned. It obviously only has one microphone. But they claim that there's no need for it because with it being completely down inside the ear canal, our pinup actually does that directionality. Every person that I know that's had one rejected. I don't do that. We don't have the money for the equipment that's necessary to do it here at the university, but I do have colleagues that have done them, and I've seen several patients that tried it and didn't like it. So, and then the other is the Baja, which is a bony hearing, so it's for significant conductive hearing losses. And what happens is they drill a hole in the mastoid, and they have a speech processor, looks very much like the one on the cochlear implant, but then rather than transmitting it to an electrode array, it converts it into vibrations, which are then picked up by the cochlea, and it bypasses the middle ear and the outer ear. And just like if you've had a hearing test on the bone conduction, that's basically what it's like. Questioni. All right. Don't forget to pick up your paper, and I will see you next week.
Yeah, I guess something.